7, so I guess we can get this meeting on the road. Due to several issues, we've got to be a little bit more formal now in this committee, so we have to read certain things to you before the meeting.
This is the minutes.
So I'm going to read this because I don't have it memorized. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the WHNC Environmental Committee Meeting. Today is Wednesday, August 8th, 2018. My name is Steve Randall, and Alec Zemek and I co-chair this meeting. During tonight's meeting, we'll be discussing the items that are listed on the meeting's agenda. There are copies of the agenda available to you on the tan-colored table against the wall.
They're not there. They're all gone.
They're all gone? I'm not putting this down.
What is the minutes? Do you want to see the minutes?
What do you want, minutes or agendas?
Agenda.
We can
I got
probably-
minutes.
We can share an agenda. We can share some agendas.
Is there any more?
No, everything that we have is shared.
Are we sharing? You can put it right here. on
The agenda contains a list of
You can
items.
share.
The agenda contains a list of items that we'll be discussing during tonight's meeting. We will proceed with each agenda item in numerical order. Before we make a decision on any item, members of the public will be provided the opportunity to comment on the item that we're considering. In order for you to speak and be heard on any agenda item, you will be called on by me when it's your turn to speak. You need to fill out a speaker card. Speaker cards are also on that turntable closest to the door. Each person will be allotted 2 minutes for their comments. If you have general comments on an item not on the agenda, not listed on the agenda, you may make your comments during the public comment portion of the meeting. You would also need to fill out a speaker card to do so, and each person will be allotted 2 minutes for their comment. Please understand that certain laws apply that limit our discussion only to the items listed on the agenda. These laws prohibit our ability to respond to public comments and limit the actions that we may take during tonight's meeting. Thus, we may be legally prohibited from acting on a concern that you have expressed on a non-agenda item. However, please note that your concern may become a topic of discussion at a future meeting for the committee only after we have been able to list the item on the agenda. When a person is speaking, they are entitled to courtesy and respect. There should not be any other discussion occurring in the room. If you want to chat with your neighbor, please take that conversation outside during the meeting. We will treat one another with respect during this meeting. That means that we act with civility and decorum. We do not boo, hiss, or hiss when disagreeing with someone's point of view. Any competing viewpoints may be articulated without the need for inappropriate or uncivil actions. Lastly, please silence your cell phones. Okay? We have a quorum, since there are 4 people on this committee and all 4 people are present. Let's go to the minutes. Does anybody have any changes that they see that might be necessary for the minutes?
I need your name.
Any correction to amendments? Obvious misspelling. The active name is here. Okay, Brett, you good? Are you good? Alec wrote them, so he's good. Okay, so the minutes from the July meeting are accepted as written. Comments from the chairs. Alec, do you have any comments?
Yes, yes. I made a mistake at the last meeting. I didn't bring this report along, which I think leads into the presentation that Christina's going to make.
May I have a copy of the last month's meeting minutes?
May I
Okay,
finish?
we're on the table.
Here.
You didn't get a copy.
Here, you can
I
see mine.
apologize, I was just asking if I could
Yeah.
get one.
Okay.
Let's try to raise our hands if you want to speak, especially somebody else has the floor.
So here is the report, or the presentation, 65 pages. And I will just read 2 conclusions, and then I'll turn it over to the next person. This is in the past rainy season. There were no permit limit exceedances at any NPDES outfalls this season. Only one benchmark limit was exceeded at outfall 2 for iron. The other conclusion they have on the human health risk assessment, potential recreational exposure by incidental ingestion, dermal contact, and surface water runoff exiting the SSFL are below levels of concern established by Cal, EPA, and US EPA. And that's all I have for the moment.
That's the complete report.
This is a complete report. The report is available on Boeing's SSFL website. You look for it under the stormwater expert panel.
Okay, and that's the report for a meeting that was held at SSFL on July 25th. And several of us attended that. Okay, so there are 2 items of new business. So the first item is a presentation by Christina Walsh, Understanding Stormwater Water Flows, Oversight and Regulatory Process for the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. So, Christina, if you continue with your presentation.
Thank you. I brought some maps for context because they're rarely made available when we discuss Santa Susana Field Laboratory. So understanding where Santa Susana is in comparison to where we are here in the West Hills is important. One of the things, this is an important map to me. You can see on this one here where Santa Susana Field Laboratory is, and you can see where the Chatsworth Nature Preserve is. And you can see that the Santa Susana Field Laboratory is actually larger than that nature preserve, to give you an idea of context and just how it's the entire mountain that is above us. It's also 1,000 feet above the valley floor. So its direct relevance to West Hills, I think, is very clear. On this map, where we've overlaid on Google Earth, so you can all see the Santa Susana, the same Santa Susana Field Laboratory over Google Earth. Here you can see the Chatsworth Nature Preserve. And you can see on this one, Bell Canyon, for the most part, is on the map, as it were, off-site, but right up to the property boundary, all the way along the south, okay? This is Bell Canyon that comes out to Valley Circle, and you can see that this is Valley Circle for context, okay? This is Dayton Canyon, where they've recently developed 155 homes or so, reaching right up to this back area here. So we have these 2 drainages where we had traditional perchlorate contamination that had come down the hill. That is one stormwater concern. According to the NIPD's permit, that is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That is what the regulatory process to, you're not allowed to discharge wastewater, and if you do, you have to have a permit to do so. And so they have a NIPD's permit that says that they are not allowed to discharge stormwater off the site when it rains. So my concern for the past 5 years is that at Outfall 2, where 60% of the water comes off the site, there's rarely data, okay? So when it rains, they say that there's not enough water to collect a sample. According to their NIPD's permit, Outfall 2 is a composite sample. What that means is that they have an automatic outfall system that grabs from the rainfall period over a 24-hour period. So you don't have to have a person actually there. So that's important when they say, we had to wait until it was safe and there was no water when we got there. So that's not a good response to why wasn't there any samples taken at Outfall 2. This is a question I've been asking every time it rains for about the past 5 years. And rarely, not never, but rarely is there data. So I went to the water board to present my concerns again about this fact. And they had a PowerPoint waiting for me. And a water board staffer presented that as a counter, saying that there was very little water, only the 8th storm produced running water at outfall 2, okay? So outfall 2, first of all, the purpose of an outfall is to measure water quality to comply with this NIPD's permit, which requires them to measure water at each of these exiting points, which are all of the canyons, every time it rains. So in the recent rains where it rained for 4 days straight, okay, when it rained for 4 consecutive days, and if you look at Bell Canyon driveways, they're all little bridges to get across, because otherwise they can't get their cars out when it rains. That's how much water comes down Bell Canyon. But when it rains at outfall 2, there's never enough water. So that's very frustrating to me. So when they made this counter presentation, they said, so by the way, for context, this is outfall 2, this is outfall 1. They showed me that all these impervious surfaces had been removed and therefore there wouldn't be flow. Except for this doesn't meet with this. So that would have nothing to do with whether there is water at outfall 2. Okay, so that's a concern. Okay? They gave me this presentation that explained why there's never water. Now, why it matters is right above, this is a canyon that flows down, comes down like this, and comes out to the LA River. That is the headwater to the LA River. It begins at Santa Susana. For the people who know West Hills baseball, if you know Bell Creek, you know that it runs every day, rain or shine. There is always water in Bell Creek with the exception of the driest year of the drought. There was a dry period. But other than that, for 20 years, summer, winter, it doesn't matter, there's water. There might be less, but there's water. So, if there's water, if this is the top of the hill, this is the exit that leads to the LA River, 60% of the water when it rains comes down this way. How can there never be water where they measure? So the purpose of the NIPD's permit is to comply. If they say, and this is the most recent explanation from Mazhar Ali, is the staffer at the water board. He said, Cassandra and I, we were standing right there, it was raining and there was no water. So my point was, if there's no water when it's raining, and this is the point that has been selected in order to measure water quality to see if we are safe below, it's not the right place. If there's never water when it rains, okay? Every time it rains, there's no water, okay? So I will agree, this is the Burrow Flat fault. It goes right across. There are other little faults. Faults are cracks where you could get, if you have a smaller, narrower flow, it would sort of disappear into that flow, but it would have to come out somewhere else. So we know there are seeps right at the property line, but they are inside of the property, that they are on Boeing property according to Boeing, okay? These seeps feed the creek every day, 365 days a year, 24/7, okay? So there's always water in those seeps, but there's never water where they say they have to measure the water. So they never have data. So then at this meeting on the 25th, they talked about the health risk assessment, where they told us that the health risk assessment for stormwater quality is going to be based on outfall 2, 18, 19, and perhaps 1. So what does that mean? That means that they're excluding all of Area 4 that goes to the north from the health risk assessment. So they're not measuring water that is leaving the site at the burn pit, at the SRE, at outfall 10, at the RMHF. These are all the radioactive materials handling facility was W on a scale of A to Z when it came to radiation exposures from the historical, you know, we have 1959, a nuclear accident, and then we have several following that time, all of which rained back down on the site and has impacted these outfalls. Now this, thank you for holding this out. This was something that was handed out. You might see it's familiar, it looks like shit, right? So these are not outfall numbers, these are number of violations per outfall. So when you see 41 and 27 at 1 and 2, that's a concern. Now if we go back to the health risk assessment, they're going to be using outfall 18, if you look at that PowerPoint, which I also have on my laptop. They're going to use outfall 18 and outfall 2, where they say they have robust data. Now I call for 5 years, there's no data. I do a PRA, I make an appointment, I go to their conference room, they have 10 boxes, I get to look through it, I can't find any data. But now they say it's robust, even though they gave a PowerPoint to me saying why there's no data, okay? Outfall 18 is the treatment plant. That is the pipe that goes from the treatment plant down to outfall 1, where it then goes down the canyon. So that means they're basing a health risk assessment on treated clean water and no water. And excluding all the areas with the violations. And that cannot possibly give you a health risk assessment that is going to actually give you answers as far as safety for the people that live below that might be receiving these waters. Now, there is a meeting tomorrow in the Knolls. They want to uncap wells and allow people to start using them again. These are contaminated. People have been affected for years. So now I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell to give a little context to what I've just said. I would prefer to show, and then I would love to answer all the questions you have.
No, I just want to, I have friends who live up on Bell Canyon, and they live up above the hill. And when you talked about those little things, all I see coming down is from the irrigation that they've over irrigated their land. So, and it's coming down as excess water, and it goes
That's not what we're
directly.
talking about though in a rain
No.
event, right?
No, but I'm
So
just
they
saying
build
on a
bridges.
regular, on
So
a
if
regular.
you're familiar in Bell Canyon, where they have literally bridges to cross to get from their driveway to
Yeah,
the street
yeah,
because
our
of the
friends have
wide
that.
water flow.
Yeah, our
That
friends
is
have one of
because
them.
of the water acreage, the amount of water flow that occurs during a rain event, okay? You can see like a wild waters right at the mouth where the gate is. Okay, so I'm gonna give some context. Some of these are old pictures from my former museum. This is the SRE. This is where the nuclear accident happened. If you imagine, these are fuel rods. So when 13 of 43 of these melted, some of these workers spent days, literally 12-hour shifts at a time, trying to jiggle 4 guys at a time for sometimes 16 hours, jiggling, laying on the ground on a tarp with their faces touching the tarp, and that tarp had to be removed every 24 hours because it was contaminated. They were laying there like this trying to jiggle, and some of them came up with nothing because they were melted. So there were impacts, and that's the reason I'm showing you this picture. All right. This, if you look at, and I have the data to back this up, but on Google Earth, this canyon that goes like this from Coca, it's a canyon on Google Earth. It is a landfill that is marked on their own maps. This entire thing, not just the pile I'm pointing at, is a debris field that is filled in with debris from demolition within the site. Instead of taking it on trucks, they just fill in a canyon. In some cases, when they dug out nuclear reactors, they filled the hole with construction material that was contaminated during that process. That is part of the historical site assessment. Okay, so these I think will be helpful to look at for context, because this is looking down from the hill down to West Hills. This is West Hills, that's the nature preserve. I'm standing basically at CTL3. So you can see the fault that leads to Dayton Canyon. And so that gives you a little bit of context about what we're dealing with when we're putting homes right below where this was done. This one is the opposite for the people that live on the other side of the hill. So this one is looking from, this is the flatness of Area 4, Borough Flats, that's why it was called the Flats. That was not ideal. And then the canyons leading down to Brandeis Bardeen is what this is. This is Simi Valley, okay? So this is very, very steep. The edge was piped back to the R2 pond from the SRE and other places, but that's just the edge in these specific facilities. All of this is still, rain is falling on the ground and it does what rain does. It washes around, it soaks in, it does all of those things. So that's something that when we say we don't have to worry about water quality, I'm just simply asking for it to be measured. And I can't seem to get it done, and I've been trying for 5 years. This one, Bonnie, is for you. What's outfall for?
Show me.
So one of the things, this is happening in several places, but this one I have from the sky. This is the TARP of the SRE, the Sodium Reactor Experiment, where the nuclear partial meltdown in 1959 occurred. Okay?
When was that picture taken?
This I took from the sky, 2008,
Okay.
I would say, because I had to rent a plane.
Still
So I actually have a receipt. So I'm guessing 2008, maybe 2009, probably 2008. All right, what's important about this picture when it comes to stormwater flow? This is the outfall, okay? This thing has a lot of zeolite, activated carbon, a lot of gravel, a lot of sand, a lot of things to minimize. But here's what's important, and then they measure the water after it goes through all of that, okay? That's what they do, right there. So what's important about this picture is that this tilts this way, okay? Tilts this way, if you can imagine. And they have a swale that is designed, by the way, here are FARC tanks where they're sucking the water back up from the SRE pond into tanks right here. They're not in this picture because it's 2008. This is a designed concrete swale with curbs on either side, like a street curb. It's about this wide, about the width of this. And what it does is it takes the drainage of all of the SRE, this has been true for 50 years. It's designed this way to take the water down here to the SRE pond. And then there was a release from there. So why does that matter? Because this is the outfall and this is where the water goes. So year after year, the water comes off the tarp here and this is where they measure. So they're not getting a reading about the tarp, they're getting a reading about what's coming off of this one tree, which is, let's say, it's washed down, if you will. It is not as telling as, what we want to know is what is the water quality coming off of this, not what is this tree doing. So this is the kind of frustrations that we have played with for years. This, excuse me, is the bottom of the R2 pond where they say that all that water is clean. That's where they store the water that they then release out of 18. That is not clean water.
Is there water in that picture?
That is, I was there with Merrily Fellows and it was dry that day. So that's why I took that picture. I had permission to do it. This is where the hot lab was. During the cleanup, they moved all of the barrels and all the waste to the parking area, which is what this is. When they sampled, they didn't sample the parking lot where all this stuff was. So they didn't get a true reading again. So if we're trying to find where the stuff is so we get the stuff, because that to me, at the most simple level, is really what we want to make sure we're doing so that we are safe. And that, time after time, is what we are not getting. This is another one for you, just for reference. This is that big hole.
That's it.
This is a 50-foot deep hole that was gonna be a nuclear reactor, but when they made it, they hit water. They hit groundwater. So they were not, and that was, so you have a release into groundwater from the
Do this.
reactor
Where's the hole?
here, and there's a fence that goes across. There is no point on the ground if you're standing at that fence that you can see the hole, by the way. It is just away from it's pretty brilliant. So you can only see that from the sky. This is I was describing this at an earlier meeting, and I was reviewing the meeting to think about what I was going to say tonight. This is inside STL4. This is instructions. You are only allowed to burn waste, vent it, when the wind is going to the south, southwest, north, not to the San Fernando Valley. Because this is where the populated people were. This is how they thought for 50 years. So for 50 years, that might be good for us with prevailing winds, but we have a park that is directly in the way of this. And we have a cluster of 50 children surrounding the site that have pediatric cancer that we have to be concerned about. Because the fact is that they're here, we don't have answers, and this happened. This was by design. It had to be a minimum of 3 to 5 miles an hour wind, because otherwise the waves would rain back down on them. And they had incidents that are documented of them getting caught in canyons because the wind changed. So we go through this, and I'm just gonna leave these for you all to look at. I'm gonna put them on the other side of the room, if that's okay. I don't wanna mess with you, but this is the timeline, according to the Department of Energy, of the meltdown. You can go through them. It talks about that they had to release, they had to vent radioactive gases for several weeks. Okay, so on July 12th, when it began, so it went from the 12th to the 26th. During that period, they
59.
so for 2 weeks, they still were running it and trying to figure out what was going wrong. And you can go through the timeline and actually read, 4:20 a.m. what they were thinking. But the fact is, after 2 weeks of not knowing what was wrong, they restarted it again. It's called a scram. And this is all documented right here. So when people say that it didn't happen, here's a summary.
I just want to interrupt for 1 second.
But I just want
I
you.
just want to interrupt for 1 second. So that little noise you heard was the 20-minute timer for the presentation, but I'm not holding you to the 20 minutes. Do you think you
That's fine. I just
Are you
wanted
okay
to
with this?
describe, thank you.
Do you need another 10 minutes?
How about just 3 or 4 to just summarize?
so
I have other documents that people can look at.
I want you to be able to do your presentations.
Okay,
I just wanted to make you aware of it.
thank you, thank you. So this is for people to be able to review. This is a $40 million radiological survey that was done dot by dot. I went with them every dot. It was hosted at my museum where all this stuff came from. So when we hear about that this didn't happen, this was part of the ARRA, the American Resource and Recovery Act that kickstarted our economy again. We got $40 million of that to find out what happened here. And what we know from that is that we still need to take care of it, and we certainly need to sample. So when we have data that they show us that is false, that's why I ask questions. When I press things, when it said, well, Brandeis, they got a letter. This is a study of Brandeis from 1991. Because that's how the buffer zone came to be. It was part of a lawsuit because it was contaminated. It was part of Brandeis. So after all of this, they're still sampling, they're still finding problems. The northern drainage, this here, sorry, I wanted to make sure I had everything on my top. This here is from, this was an immediate substantial endangerment order for the northern drainage that leads to Brandeis Bardeen. Immediate substantial endangerment order. These are the facts. And that is why our concerns about Brandeis are real when they have children river rafting in wastewater. It is really legitimate when you think about 52 children with cancer fighting for their lives, including in Bell Canyon, 3 baseball coaches right at the edge of Bell Creek where it comes out.
4, we got another one. 4 coaches,
Really?
4 coaches. Another one.
I thought we
The
were
same?
going to continue and let her speak.
I'm so sorry.
without interruption.
I did not know that. So that's really what I'm here to say. These are, this child is no longer alive, okay? So this was at the vigil. These are real children. Hazel, she's standing there with Hazel. Hazel died last year. She's no longer here. These are, so are we gonna go 52, 51, 50, because 2 have died? We have to think about this differently. These are our children. So, I'm here to answer questions. I thank you for your time. My point is, you should not be not measuring. When they tell me this is page by page, every page is a different set of chemicals and you see contaminants. So when they say it's not there and I say it is, I'm not calling them a liar, I'm saying I have this book. That's what I'm doing. Thank you.
And then,
Okay, thank you very much. So I have a speaker card from Bonnie Clee.
I also have a question.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to take that from you.
I heard at the meeting we all went to that they found TCE in Bell Canyon. I didn't hear you mention that.
It's mentioned in some of the reports.
Okay, but I
And it
didn't hear
said-
you say that.
Let me finish. And it said that it was in minor concentrations, but it did come from SSFL.
Okay. I've got this map that shows all the violations. Do you remember what year that was?
This was 2000 and probably 9, when these violations, it amounted to, I think you're gonna count that up and it'll add up to about 179 violations. They were fined over $400,000. They then sued the state of California, took it to the state level and said it wasn't fair, which is why we now have a water board that is very, careful. They don't push Boeing because Boeing will not be pushed. They say we get to release, we just won't tell you what's in the water. So
Also, I wanted to mention that the letter that Steve wrote, or whatever you did, you posted a review of the last work group meeting. I think it was the last one, and in it you talked
That was a
about,
work group meeting
yeah.
from 4.5 years
I
ago.
couldn't believe that when I read that.
That was a recap of what was said at that meeting. That
But-
wasn't my opinion.
But what it said was, in 2013, was it 2013, that they took the buildings down without authorization?
There was a
Without
le-
testing them.
there was a letter,
2013?
according to EPA, over 200 buildings were removed
Whatever
without.
that posting said, that's not my interpretation or my words of anything. That is exactly what was presented by the speakers at the work group meeting, and you were a member of the work group, and you were at that meeting.
It was a good recap.
It was, you acknowledged right after the posting that it was a
Right,
good
it was a
recap.
good recap, but what I remembered was 2013, they took down all those buildings and they dumped them in our local landfills in Calabasas, in Hidden Hills, where else, Christina?
and then it was
Sunshine Canyon.
Sunshine Canyon.
It was Sunshine
And
Canyon
then-
that they had to pay for.
In 2014, we're getting all the sick children, and John thinks that the coaches were getting sick after that. And the creek runs right next to the baseball field from Bell. And he said they just got their 4th coach now with cancer.
Thank you, Ron.
So I think there's a correlation there.
Thank you for comments. Does anybody have questions? Let's take Alan first and then Ron.
I'll just mention in the briefing presentation that the expert panel made, they said one benchmark limit exceedance at outfall 2 was for iron. So obviously means that they did test at outfall 2. So you might want to read the report. It is available. And on the health human risk assessment, they based it on runoffs from outfall 1, 2, 8, 9, 11, 18, and 19.
Which excludes all of area 4, as I said.
So,
And 18 and 19 are treated water out of a pipe.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, I think the statement was made that there was TCE in Bell Canyon. My understanding is there was TCE detected at low levels in one of the seeps on the Boeing property, which is not in Bell Canyon. TCE is a volatile, very volatile gas, and the studies that have been done on the creek and on the soils in the creek, which go back years, did not show TCE. So whatever TCE was at that seep was probably released into the atmosphere, at which point that water was free of TCE. I can't tell you, but I can tell you that at least within the canyon, as far as I know, there was no TCE.
You have vinyl chloride, which is the final degradation product that is coming off of those seeps right at Bell Canyon. So that shows that there is indeed TCE going into the canyon. You wouldn't have a degradation product, and by the way, vinyl chloride is 10 times more toxic than TCE.
Okay, so if you want to speak, let's raise our hands. I saw Bonnie first, and then Joanne, and then Carl.
I've been involved since 1995, and TCE's been found in Bell Creek many times.
I would like to see those reports, because
If you could find them.
I've looked at reports and I've not seen that.
I know.
So if you could provide those, I would greatly
It's
appreciate it.
chemical by chemical, it's showing you the
Joanne,
dots of the
Joanne.
text right here.
And you were talking
Within Bell
about
Canyon,
the,
I'm sorry, I can't let that go. Within Bell Canyon or at the site, or where are
The
these
seep-
dots?
The seep that
The
is
seep.
right at the boundary that feeds
Okay.
Bell Canyon.
Okay, Joanne?
okay, you were talking about the houses that were built on Valley Circle. As I understand it, they went with a very old environmental impact report. They didn't get a new one. They just came in and bada bing, bada boom, Donald Sterling
Yeah, they
built those.
They weren't required to get a new one, unfortunately.
I
We
thought,
didn't have
I
meetings
thought
on
after
it.
so many years, they have to get a
They
new
were
one.
just under, it
Nope.
had to do with the time when they filed for the
They were
permit to
just
build,
under.
they were just under the time.
Ah,
And it wasn't when they actually started building, it had to do with the filing, and then the building didn't start quite a time later.
okay.
It was,
But those houses are god awful.
Yeah, Merle was next, and then Bonnie.
I'm trying to sit here and kind of phrase my words. Because, there's statistics here, and I'm new to this information, relatively new to all of this. And the statistics that's been going on 60 years, almost 60 years, from 1959. And there is from everything that I hear, the yesterdays and the reports from yesterdays, in my way of thinking, is not important. Not important. What is important is what's today. Because environment, Mother Nature, soil, air evolves, changes, okay? So we're talking about what's today. And the bottom line of what I'm hearing from people deals with the lives of children and human beings. And that to me is what's heartbreaking. And as responsible, I mean, I truly feel as a member of this council responsible for that. Because we represent people that live in this area. We represent the people that are moving into those homes with whatever environment impact report they're getting, whatever they're doing here, whatever they're doing there. And my feeling, and I don't know what the solution is here, but my feeling is,
Look at it.
excuse me, but my feeling is that we, the neighborhood council, has an obligation to try to stop this from happening, whether it be on the state level, whether it be on the federal level, whether it be with, you know, with what is that, the health, what's the Department of Health and, you know, disease control? You know, CDC. But we have an obligation to make whatever we have to do to have, wait, Christine, let me finish, please don't interrupt.
Sorry.
We have an obligation to do whatever we can do, at whatever level we can do, to get this problem issue taken care of, or at the very least, stop any building that's going on. That's just my opinion, all right? Why, and I don't know whether there's ever been a class action suit filed.
There has.
There has, okay, but I'm talking about, not to Boeing, not to the state. Class action suit to the state for not doing what they're supposed to be doing to clean things up, to do what has to happen.
Didn't
You know.
they do it to
But
Department of Energy?
let me finish, please. Please don't interrupt.
No.
Just please.
Okay.
Because the life and death of children and men and women should be our first priority. That's it.
Thank you, Merle. Bonnie?
We were talking about the environmental impact report in Dayton Canyon. It was old, it was 1999 or 97, and there was no law that you would have to do it over if it was more than 10 years. Sheila Kuehl tried to pass a law, and she didn't get it through. And for those of you who don't know, Dayton Canyon used to be the Rocketdyne dump. They used to own it. And then they gave it away to an employee, and then he started selling it. By the time I got involved, it was still a dump that had been burned away, and floods had washed out the dirt, where you could see all the barrels and all the concrete, and you could see the debris from Rocketdyne. All the barrels, 55-gallon drums, had been shot with high-powered rifles. And we have pictures of those, and I know the son of the fireman who did the shooting and died of cancer. But, I mean, to me, that's just tragic that they built that canyon.
Thank you. Jan?
Christina, the gist I think I got, and I may be completely wrong, from your presentation was that they're supposed to be testing, and they're claiming that they're testing, but they're deliberately choosing places to test that are going to give them the lowest readings, and choosing not to test in other places. Is that what the gist of this whole presentation was? Okay, thank you.
And this is the hillside. Those are barrels.
Those are what?
Barrels.
Those
Oh,
are
Like
Barrels.
10,000.
in Dayton
Yeah.
Canyon.
That's it.
Jan, just to, and I don't know if I'm correct about this, but just to jump on that, to allow, add one more phrase, to allow their reports to be on the positive side of the situation, not the negative side.
Right.
Yes?
May I add something,
Sure.
please? One of the things that I do is I write Public Records Act requests because they don't respond. And even then, they often don't respond. This particular one is a response to like 10 Public Records Act requests. They waited a year and said, you asked for these things and we don't know. DTSC found no documents responsive to this request. In each category, they said that. I specifically asked about the Bell Canyon incident of a release of a high level of fluoride, because fluorine gas was something that they used. Very toxic, very dangerous. They had an incident, there were lots of letters about it. I have the letters, they're marked that they're part of their database, okay? They're scanned, they're BNA scanned, yet their PRA response to me was that they don't have any information about it. So this right here just shows, it doesn't matter what I ask, they say, go, it's on the internet.
What to do?
And so, well, one of the things is to say you need to really look where water flows and follow your own NIPD's permit and your own rules, because they never do.
Never know.
Thank you
Well,
very-
if nobody asks but me, we can be certain of that.
Thank you very
And
much.
that's,
Wow.
We're gonna have one
that's
more-
my problem.
We're gonna have one more comment regarding
Someone
the
else?
presentation. Please, one more comment from Alec, and then we're gonna move on to the next item on the agenda. And this does come up in old business, there's some discussion about it, since it's later on. Alec?
Everybody wants a cleanup. There's nobody standing here or sitting here that doesn't want a cleanup. The CAG wants a cleanup to US EPA standards. US EPA standards. Fine, we want to clean up. Other people feel that there's some shadiness going on. Fine, that needs to be corrected, but there has to be a cleanup. But if we're getting into cancer and discussing cancer and trying to help cancer, that's an entirely separate effort. I don't know anything about cancer. I don't know what causes it. I don't know who has it, except I've had some of it. But I just want to tell you that that is almost another committee, another commitment in a different
True.
direction.
True.
Yeah.
I think this meeting is for cleanup.
Thank you very much.
Do I get one more comment?
One more quick. because we're gonna
I
move
just
the
want to
next
say
item.
that the US EPA is a risk-based cleanup, and the risk is for the people hiking up there. There is no cleanup for the risk to the people who already live here.
Thank you, Bob.